Now I'm going to demonstrate how I use this brush pack in a real working environment. And I decided to create a very quick painting for this matter. So this took me around 6 hours of work, 3D included. I will not cover how to make a 3D blockout in this course or talk too much about fundamentals of painting here, but only focus on which brush I used, where and why. If you're interested in those other topics, be sure to check out my other courses online. So after making a very quick and dirty 3D blockout, just to put a composition together, I start by making some adjustments to the image right away. Since the 3D is so rough, first I want to suggest some trees and bushes in the background, so I take my triangle lighter brush to sketch it out. Be sure to keep the flow around 50% with this brush, so you have better results. Then I want to get in the center of the image and add some meaningful details. So I'm gonna use the selection tool with the hard chalk brush to block out a door and add some other features to the house. Now I'm using the lines grain brush to rework the edges and give them a wear effect. I keep on using those brushes to block out more details on the house, beams and windows. As you can see, I alternate between all of my hard edges, no transfer brushes, to block out new things in the image. Here I'm using the hard elliptical with some color dynamics to make moss on top of the big rock on the right. I want to make sure the foliage of the tree don't stay like this. That's why I take the smoothie brush and color pick a lot in order to create some interesting brush stroke in that first tree. Here what I'm doing is using the magic wand tool to make a quick and dirty selection and use the watercolor brush to add a little bits of blue in the shadows of the trees. I keep on using the watercolor brush in the back because I want that tree to be much less detailed. Then I go on with the smoothie brush to rework the edges of that tree in order to get a more natural look. Now I want to push back the values of the environment behind the house just a little bit so we get a better sense of the silhouette of the house, which is the main point of interest in the image. So what I like to do is make a very quick selection and use the soft smooth brush with a light value just to homogenize the contrast and reduce the range of dark and light values in this area. Here I use a bit of the strong oil brush to create some painterly effects between the foliage and the sky. What I'm doing now is making another dirty selection with the magic wand tool, and I'm using the square particles brush in conjunction with color dynamics to make the floor more interesting and create some graphic accidents. You can see me doing the same on the roof. Now I want to make the wooden beam a little bit more interesting, and this is the perfect time to use the texture lines brush to do so. As you can see, with the selection and a quick brush stroke, it creates an interesting motif. Now, since the 3D blockout is so rough, the hot chalk brush is the perfect tool to rework these branches and give them a more natural look. It took me some time to embrace the no transfer brushes at first, but when you're learning Photoshop, it can be quite confusing and counterproductive to not add transfer to your brush. But it allows me to be much more assertive with my paint strokes and also make bolder shapes in a much more natural way. I really suggest you incorporate this in your workflow, and after some practice, you'll definitely see improvement. At this stage, I'm still experimenting with visual language, and the area I'm working on at the moment is still subject to change depending on my choices of values and contrast. So you'll see me later coming back to it and changing the local colors a lot, because at this point I'm still not sure what I want to do with this zone of the painting, but I like to experiment a lot in the earlier stages. Now here is a good example of how I sometimes use the soft smooth brush just to modify quickly the values of a selection. Here I really want the roof to be darker, so I quickly select the area I want to modify, and with the soft smooth brush or the soft noise brush, I'll take a darker value and just apply the paint stroke on top of it. Now continuing with the roof rendering, I'm gonna use the hard chalk brush to block out the tiles very quickly and naturally. Since I'm not looking for a very neat pattern, this works perfectly. I could have created a pattern on a flat surface and just modify it with the transformation tool, but for this specific art style that I'm going for, I think this is doing the trick quite well. Once I'm done with the hard edge brushes, I can come back with the line brushes to calm down some of the texture work and soften some edges. Being mindful of your edges is quite important, and I take special precautions with it in my paintings. That's why so often you'll see me come back to the edges with different brushes, often to soften them up or give them just a little bit of texture. Now on another layer, I can now block out very quickly some rampant ivy with the leaves and ivy brushes, and I can quickly add details and refine edges later. I keep blocking out more details with the triangle, lines grain and hard elliptical brushes. Once again, having brushes without transfer on, just like this one, helps me block out clean shapes very quickly. I decide to emphasize the light in front of the house. So to do that, I'm gonna use the soft noise brush to add lighter values on top of the house and be very mindful of the edge between the light and the shadow in order to not make it too harsh to the eye and create a contrast that would be too strong. I'm also gonna soften the edge with my lines brush with a saturated value to give this kind of brazing effect you get under strong sunlight. Here is a good example of how I use the smoothie and triangle lighter brush to block out and paint soft material like smoke or clouds. And I'll often start with a selection to give me a broad direction for the initial shape, but quickly I'll get rid of it in order to adjust the shape and edges with my brush, just like so, to give it a more natural look. So I decided during my early explorations of the painting that I wanted to add a secondary warm light coming in from the house. To do that, I use a mix of watercolor and soft brush to give a brazing effect, and hard elliptical paint strokes to suggest the harsh impact of the light on flowers and plants outside. I want to keep modeling and detailing the big rock, so to put it more in the painting, I had a smooth suggestion of light with the soft noise brush on the side, and I reinforced the ambient occlusion between the rock and the house with the line grain brush. I keep adding more features to the house and more details in the middle area of the painting with hard brushes. The different combinations of shapes and textures allows me to create interesting graphical variations of the different materials overall. But as soon as I'm going away from the center area, you can see that I'm starting to use more soft brushes, like the smoothie one, that helps me block out and suggest some terrain volume on the left. I like to create a natural hierarchy between the type of edges, depending on the nature of the material or the composition. If it's important that we perceive the silhouette very well, I'll use hard edges. On the opposite, soft edges help me blur things out in a painterly manner. Sometimes I'll want to create noisy, very detailed areas that had richness in some surfaces. Therefore, in this case, I'll use my particle brushes, for example. Here, for example, I think it's important that we distinguish the silhouette of this rock very well. That's why I want to get a hard edge on it. Also, I'm thinking about lowering the values since I want it to be more in the shadows. On the opposite side, for the background, I just want to be very light and suggest hills and trees in a meaningful graphical way. But I don't have to be representative and draw every single tree with a hard round brush. Now, as you can see, I can go back on the rock with a large watercolor brush. Just do a simple selection with the magic wand tool, and I can add some light from the sky bouncing on top of the rock using large brush strokes. Since the beginning, I've said a lot of time that I'm doing quick selections. It's because it's one of my methods of working that helps me be much more efficient and also will help you paint more freely with large brush strokes, where you don't have to be so mindful about the overall shapes since you blocked it in with the selection first. So from now, I keep on working on the painting everywhere at the same time. I'm constantly going through my different brushes to rework surfaces, refine edges, and add depths and volumes to the leaves, the tiles, the beam. Also, I'm working on the transition between different materials and different objects. For example, between the branches and the foliage, I want to show the different faces of the trees in order to create a nice volume. And I want to show the puffiness of the foliage also. That's why I spend a little bit of time on this part. I keep detailing the vegetation, the rocks, in order to find cool shapes and patterns to enrich my painting and create some nice rhythm. I also don't hesitate to go back and forth between the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. I think it's very important to feel free when you're painting and don't stay focused on only one area for too long. I'm constantly trying to find a good balance of graphical qualities between the background and the house, for example, because I want the edges in the background to feel very smooth and light, but at the same time suggest that there are puffy trees and hills to discover over there. You might notice that at some point I'm also using brushes that were not supposed to be used in this way. For example, you can notice that sometimes I'm using, for example, the triangle lighter to paint rocks or the smoothie brush to paint rocks. And sometimes I get in the flow of it and I find a cool way of painting a little crack or a little fissure. And basically every brush is kind of versatile, and sometimes I'll just go with the flow and try different stuff with it. Now this is another cool use of the textures line brush here. As you can see, with a simple selection, I can suggest stylized tuft of grass and create a cool motif very quickly. So you can find different creative ways with the brushes to create new stuff. For example, this tuft of grass looks pretty funky to me. Also, a method that I like to use is to put on color dynamics and tick the apply per tip function in order to create some cool patterns, just like I'm using on the tree on the foreground. You can see it creates some sort of weird volumes and some richness on the surface, something that I like a lot. Now, I've used a lot of brushes from the pack since the beginning, most of them actually, except for the FX1 and the atmospheric ones, since they will come into play later on. But I want to add some diversity in patterns for the bushes and plants on the ground. So here I'm gonna demonstrate how I very often take some time to create new brushes on the go, just to add more variations and interest in my paintings. So let's take a look at how to create a brush in Photoshop.